Welcome back, everybody. It's two guys and a stack of comics.
That's Mike. I'm Reed. Wanted to talk a little bit today about a TV universe that has just recently wrapped up. One that ran a lot longer than I think anybody thought it would, and that is the Arrowverse of TV shows. Technically, the Superman and Lois show is still running. However, that's kind of been disconnected from the Arrowverse and appears to be wrapping up as well. So mainly we wanted to talk kind of about our thoughts as comic book fans, as DC fans, about just overall, how do we think Arrow, Flash, was it Supergirl, Batwoman, Legends of Tomorrow, Black Lightning, kind of all those those shows, and what the DC kind of Arrowverse was really, as fans, our perspective on it.
Okay, so the Arrowverse started
2012 with Arrow.
With Arrow, and that show was really cool. I liked that show, and I watched all 7 seasons.
7 or 8, yeah.
I can't say that I watched all the seasons of all these shows. Being a huge comic book fan, I would like to say that I did, but
some of them just made it too hard to get through.
I did lose interest. Of course, I saw all 9 seasons of The Flash, although it was a strained.
It was a strained relationship at the end with all of these shows.
But you gotta love it. I mean, I love the way the Arrow started.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way the character was portrayed. I liked all of the actors pretty much in that show.
Yeah,
I
think
the
Arrow
way
was a real strong point of the universe.
Yeah, and it was grounding, right? And of course, I loved it when they introduced the Flash.
One of the coolest things for me watching the Arrowverse, and as a superhero fan, especially as a DC fan, Batman is my favorite character, but I've always loved characters who don't have powers. And so Green Arrow was always a character I liked quite a bit. He does come off a bit like a rip-off Batman, and I think Arrow, the TV show, we'll talk a little bit how they maybe went a little too far sometimes to try to make him Batman.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really loved was seeing a character like that get the spotlight, because he was a character that was perfectly positioned for a TV adaptation. And that first season was so surprisingly good, because superhero television shows to that point, there had been some successful ones. The Hulk in the 70s was good, but it's a 70s TV show, right? You've had Superman, the black and white George Reeves one. You had the Dean Cain Superman show. You had Smallville.
Smallville was awesome.
Smallville was great, but all of them kind of had a very cheesy, hokey kind of thing to them.
That's why Smallville said, no tights, no flights.
Yep. And the Arrowverse certainly fell into that trap as well. But the early seasons of Arrow, I think especially the first season, you could tell they were really going for it. It kind of felt like if the CW was making a Batman Begins adaptation for Green Arrow.
Yeah. And
yes, some CW problems always pop in. Of course, there's love triangles and cheesy pop songs playing in the background at times and things like that. But the overall heart of the characters, and I think especially Green Arrow at the start, was really, really cool. And it was great to see a cool costume done for the character as well.
I really thought it was a great starting point. And I don't know that they really thought that it was going to go anywhere.
No.
But they did introduce the Flash in
season 2.
And so somebody somewhere, and that was like 2013, 2014.
2013, yeah.
Somebody somewhere said, hey, this show is doing so well. Let's see if we can flood the market.
What was really cool about the way they integrated the Flash is Arrow kind of subtly builds that. The first season of Arrow, you have a lot of him dealing with what's left in Star City and his family's legacy and all of that. And then the second season
were really cool.
You could tell they were going for it. Second season gives you Deathstroke, which was absolutely fantastic. The best villain of the Arrowverse was Manu Bennett playing Deathstroke.
Yeah.
And you kind of had that all building, and then about halfway through that season, you have where they just introduced Barry Allen as this scientist kind of on vacation from Central City who ends up helping. And it was so cool to watch that as a comic fan. That was like, I couldn't believe, this is really, that's Barry Allen. That's the Flash just showing up on these episodes.
Yeah.
And how they made you care about Barry, had him show up, how they had him interact with Arrow. It was really, really cool to see it. And I think the great thing they did is they made sure you liked Barry first.
So, one thing where the two shows, I like the way they built the supporting cast around Stephen Amell and the Green Arrow. I liked his he had his version of.
Kind of Alfred.
Yeah.
He had like a superhero partner / Alfred with Diggle, who was like
Yeah.
kind of his butler, helper, but also like a superhero in his own right. And I thought that was a really unique character.
And the what's the
Felicity, the computer tech. Yeah.
She was like the Gordon's daughter. What's her name?
Barbara, yeah, kind of like Oracle.
She was like that was
again,
the word
kind
I
of
was
them
thinking,
ripping
yeah.
off some Batman things with two characters who not in Green Arrow's comic universe.
But they looked really good. They felt right. It was a good little team, and I think it set the stage for what they were going to do in the next show, which was The Flash.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing with those shows is early on, especially the cast for The Flash and Arrow, the first couple of seasons. Arrow, with the way they cast Felicity and Diggle and integrated them in, and they weren't part of the comics, but they really fit from a TV show standpoint.
Yeah.
The way they integrated his family, his little sister Thea.
I rolled with it. It was a little far-fetched. It was
Yeah,
not
they changed a lot of things, but what you did appreciate was at least you could see where they were thinking it through. And there was enough where, and then they integrated Roy Harper, and they got him from the comics, and they really started doing some cool things. The Flash kind of did the same thing, where, Barry in the comics is very a solo character. He doesn't have, like, a team behind him. And then you got Vibe, and you get Caitlin Snow.
What was really cool about the first season of The Flash is the audience knows the villain is his mentor.
Yeah. No,
but
the way they integrated that was cool.
He doesn't know that yet. That was really cool.
And they did a really good job on both Arrow and The Flash of the first couple seasons, having them kind of be experienced but making mistakes and growing. And that's, to me, that was the great thing those early seasons did, is those characters, you cared first about Oliver Queen and Barry Allen. And then because Oliver's Arrow, you like Arrow. Because Flash is Barry, you care. And that's the thing they got right was, we're going to make you care about Barry. We're going to make you care about Barry's love life. We're going to make you care about Oliver's love life. We're going to make you care about their personal family dynamics. We're going to make you care about, like, Barry's relationship with his father, who's in prison. Barry kind of struggling with what's happened to him in his own life and being socially awkward as a result of, like, kind of being distanced because he can't open up to people, right? Those all worked. Those threads that they wove into those characters worked and made you care. And that really carried those shows.
What came after was it Supergirl or Legends that came after?
Supergirl and Legends kind of started around the same time.
I was really excited for Legends.
Yeah.
I was kind of excited for Supergirl. I thought it might be good.
Yeah, I think eventually what ended up happening, and we want to talk a lot about the good stuff, but I think where the Arrowverse ultimately failed, Batwoman, Supergirl, and Legends of Tomorrow were all shows that I think were overly ambitious.
I can't believe Legends lasted as long as it did. I remember, I'd be watching an episode of Batwoman, and I was like, Legends is still on? Because I quit watching Legends after season 2.
First season.
I was like, I can't take it anymore. Well, and I'm a DC fan at heart.
To get DC shows, to have superhero shows where I literally go, yeah, it's just not worth my time. It's hard.
That's sad because I'll make time for anything,
And I think the reason is, I think those shows, one, I think Legends of Tomorrow never really knew what kind of show it was. The first season, it was very much about Rip Hunter and Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and then they just completely got rid of them. And then they turned into a very
I like the Hawkgirl
goofy, kind of out there show with characters that were invented for the show, and it just, I think it really failed after that as far as it just didn't know what it wanted to be.
What was really cool about Legends is they took Captain Cold from Flash and had him traveling around. Also, Heatwave, and it was interesting.
It was interesting initially.
I bought in for
one or two seasons.
I think season 3.
When they had Ray Palmer from Arrow, the Atom, he showed up and he went to Legends. So they did a Firestorm debuted on the Flash, and then he moved over to Legends.
Yeah.
Sarah Lance, who had been a version of the Black Canary and Arrow, moved over. So initially it was a really good setup. And then eventually it kind of got bogged under the weight of just adding more and more and more characters. And I think that's kind of the thing that hit all of these shows.
I just organically quit watching around season 3 or something.
It just got to the point where you didn't care enough about the characters anymore. And there was too many new ones. And then I think, again, the big problem is the shows they tried to make were overly ambitious or flawed from the start. And look, one of the things is if you want to make a Supergirl TV show, you have to have full access to Superman. Supergirl can't exist in a world where there isn't Superman. Or if she does, she just needs to exist without him. But they wanted this weird half ground of, we can mention Clark Kent, we can talk about Lex Luthor, we can mention Superman
Your
exists,
cousin.
but we're never going to fully bring him. And then eventually they brought him on, but by that time you kind of lost in the show. Batwoman had the same thing with, like, well, there's Batman, but he's missing, but he's dead, but he's not dead, but I'm going to just inherit his cave. And it just felt cheap, forced, and ultimately kind of stupid.
Supergirl, like, how many seasons did you get through with Supergirl?
I don't think I made it through the first season all the way. I think the second season they brought Superman on and they had Supergirl, like, absolutely destroy him in a fight. And I don't mind her winning, but not in a solid, like, destroys him kind of way.
I watched all of season 1 and season 2, and then I think I watched all of season 2, but at some point I was like, no.
And it just got bogged under the weight of too many supporting characters. And I think this is what happened to all of them, in that originally Arrow was a very tight cast show. There was Oliver, there was Diggle, there was Felicity, and then he kind of had a little bit with Laurel and his sister Thea.
Yeah.
You had about 4 or 5 main players. The Flash, very similarly. You had Barry, you had Iris, you had Joe West, you had Cisco, and you had Caitlin. About 5 characters. Barry was always the main focus. Iris got a lot of play in there. Arrow kind of had the same thing, where Oliver's the main focus, and then his love interest is kind of second story. By the time these things got to seasons 3, 4, 5, all of a sudden, okay, well, Caitlin needs her own story arcs. That, you know, she needs entire episodes, and Vibe needs entire episodes.
It's almost like they thought, like, we can't come up with new stories for these characters unless one of them becomes superpowered.
Well, then everybody starts becoming, and like Arrow eventually, every single person Oliver meets in Star City can throw on a pair of tights and become a superhero. It's like you fully established that Oliver took almost a decade to get ready to be Arrow.
Yeah.
And he's barely surviving. And then his sister like goes to like half a vacation of training, and she's ready to go.
All of a sudden, like,
Laurel takes like 2
assassin.
self-defense classes, and all of a sudden she's ready to go.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it kind of breaks the universe because they're so invested in, oh, well, you kind of like Thea, so we need to make her a superhero too. Oh, like, Felicity's really popular. We need to give her her own villains and her own story arc.
I really like Cisco, so let's turn him into Vibe.
And it breaks it eventually, because what happens is the whole reason you start watching this show is Oliver Queen and Barry Allen. And eventually it's like, why is Barry Allen a guest star in a show called The Flash? Because you could watch it and you'd see a whole 40-minute show, and Barry was maybe 5 minutes of the plot. The rest is on Caitlin and Vibe and all these weird things, and then they just kept adding more and more and more.
And then Batwoman, I was really excited for Batwoman. I thought it was going to be awesome.
I knew it was going to be a train wreck from the trailer.
I thought it was going to be awesome. I liked the first season, but the first clue that it wasn't going to do well was my 12-year-old was like, I'm not watching any more of that with you, Dad.
Well, for me, as soon as the trailer came out and they had her find Bruce Wayne's cave and then see the suit and be like, oh, that suit's perfect. No, it's not. It'll be when it fits a woman. I'm like, okay, don't take shots at Batman. The whole reason you exist as a character is Batman.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're going to have where Batwoman's going to exist, just plausibly either have that she's the first one and don't mention Bruce Wayne. But you can't have, like, Bruce was here, but he's not. And it's one of those things that never works.
That always bothered my son. It's like, well, they're kind of talking, they're dancing around Batman, why doesn't he just show up? Mm-hmm. Or they're dancing around Superman, why doesn't he, would it kill you to throw Superman in a couple of Supergirl episodes? It wouldn't hurt the ratings.
Well, and they eventually did it, but by the time they did it, it almost makes no sense. Right?
It could be like,
well, when you had like
season.
6 world-ending disasters happen, and Superman didn't show for any of those. And then now, someone's robbing a bank and Clark Kent just shows up. It's like, okay, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Strains credulity.
And the problem with the Arrowverse ended up, and I think this is what kind of killed it, was eventually it just grew too big. And you had where you could kind of see, like, the Arrow writers really cared in season 1 and 2. And it's almost like they all kind of migrated to The Flash. And they were there for 1 and 2, and then they all kind of migrated to a different show. And you kept getting just diminishing returns. And unfortunately for Stephen Amell and Grant Gustin, they were giving it their all every season. Yeah. It's just the writing around them and the supporting characters and the CGI around them kept failing them.
What was really cool about the Arrowverse is those of us in Nerd World had these big crossover events that would happen once a year.
Yeah.
And we would all...
those were really cool.
They were big, nerdy events for nerds. And
initially those were really just fun.
People had parties. People came
I remember
over
one
the
of the theaters
house.
here locally was doing like where they were screening a couple of the episodes back to back to have like fans. And those were cool. And I think initially where those were great is, and again, I think this is the same thing that befalls most cinematic universes. Initially, what was really cool was like Oliver was so different from Barry, and so when those two had to interact, especially in like those first couple crossovers, it was just Arrow and Flash. It was so interesting watching these two different approaches. It really felt kind of like they created Arrow as Batman and Barry as Superman, and kind of balanced that dynamic of you've got the hopeful optimist, and then you've got the dark, brooding vigilante. Yeah. And I think they really did a good job of that. They had them fight and then kind of have a cool fight scene with each other and then get along. And then eventually the crossovers just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And while initially those were really cool, eventually you start getting where these crossovers happen and it's like, okay, I watch Arrow and Flash, but I don't watch Legends, Black Lightning, Batwoman, or Supergirl. And then crossovers there.
We didn't talk about Black Lightning. That show was really awesome. That's something that Jackson and I, we watched. We loved the first couple of seasons. I don't know what happened. Did it last 3 or 4 years?
It lasted 3 or 4 years, and I think again the biggest thing, the first season of the show was
kind of wonky.
Really, really good.
It kind of got wonky in those last couple of seasons.
Writers left and budget went down, and again, I think the biggest thing with the Arrowverse is had they just pared it down a bit.
That first season or two of Black Lightning was really
all
good.
The shows really had. Other than Batwoman and Supergirl, which I don't know that they ever had. Arrow, Flash, and Black Lightning especially had really good first and second seasons.
Yeah.
And then I think the most frustrating part of these is the reason the Flash got bad was because you got away from Barry Allen. Because you spent so much time on like alternate reality versions of Caitlin and Cisco's plot and Joe West getting married and here's another kid and then here's this person's from an alternate timeline. It just ends up breaking the whole thing.
I just kept waiting for Iris to get pregnant.
Because they kept talking about it, yeah.
Like 5-6 years, and it never happened.
Until the very last
Joe West has a baby with...
they make Joe like he's super old, and then he has a kid.
Okay, so his dad has a kid before Nora's born, and then you never see the kid. Like you see Joe.
Well, you see her as an adult traveling back to meet them, but then never like her growing up.
I was like, here's a couple that had a baby, but you can't ever have the baby in the show. Yeah. Like it just made no sense.
It's all those things where they introduce plot threads that make no sense, and then it just keeps stretching it too far.
That would have been so cool for Iris and Barry to have the baby
When it literally would have probably saved the shows if like halfway through this series, if like season 5, they decide to make them parents. I think that could have given a lot of life to the show. Like, how does Barry balance being a superhero with being a dad? Right? Instead, they just let's throw the elongated man in. Let's throw Caitlin's gonna die, and then have like a split personality, and it just they kept going in these weird, awful directions.
I think in the world of modern TV superhero writing, I think it was a testing ground and a proving ground. And I think if there will never be another CW verse again, but if some other network were to take up the mantle and try this formula again, CW has done all the legwork for you. You can see what worked well, what didn't work well, what made shows last longer than others, and you've got a good platform. But it was all pretty much unproven ground.
It was really cool to see, at least for a little bit, DC have some characters that you never really thought you'd see get a spotlight, and that was cool.
Remember Gamby? I was like, I can't believe Gamby's in there. It was like an Easter egg, but then he was a reoccurring character for Black Lightning. I was like, that's cool.
And it just, I think, hopefully, if anyone ever tries it again, spend the money on the writers. Like, I don't care if you have to cut the budget of the special effects down.
Yeah.
The writing. Because writing is ultimately what killed the Arrowverse. The writers got worse and worse. The dialogue got cringier and cringier. Their attempts at pop culture references and modern political references just kept getting more and more forced. And it broke under the weight. But overall, I think the Arrowverse was a very interesting thing, especially the first couple of seasons of most of the shows. But let us know what you think. What Arrowverse shows did you enjoy? Are you sad to see that the Arrowverse was gone? What was your favorite show of the bunch? Just let us know what you think below. And always thank you for joining us. You have a great day.